Hutchison. I will be your host for this session, day 4 of the Coaching Summit. C'est le jour 4 du sommet du coaching. Nous avons eu une belle programmation cette semaine. This week, we had a chance to teach a bit more about what were the coaching principles on Monday. You had a chance to talk about resilience and also have a chance to discover the principles of a group coaching conversation. And this morning, we discussed the coaching in a performance conversation. Donc, nous avons eu une belle programmation cette semaine en lien avec les principes de base du coaching lundi. Vous avez eu la chance aussi d'avoir des ateliers sur la résilience. Vous avez eu aussi ce matin ainsi que hier des principes de base pour le coaching en groupe. Ce matin, coaching pour un meilleur coaching pour le rendement de nos employés. Et cet après-midi, I am very pleased to discuss and have our speaker, Mr. Jocelyn Bérard, who is the president of the Central Region at Optimum Talent. Previously, the National Practice Leadership Assessment and Development at Optimum Talent, Monsieur Bérard a une vaste expérience canadienne et internationale dans le domaine des ressources humaines, de la gestion d'entreprises en Europe, en Amérique du Nord, au Moyen-Orient, en Asie, dans divers secteurs tels que les télécommunications, la construction automobile, les soins de santé, le commerce de détail, le secteur public et les banques. J'avais vraiment le goût qu'on ait une conversation et surtout l'expertise de M. Bérard, simply because we want to understand, you know what, how can we better use the psychometric tools? Et définitivement, le sujet de la séance aujourd'hui, qui est le diagnostic avant la prescription, comment utiliser l'évaluation psychométrique à des fins de développement. C'est un thème qui touche autant les gestionnaires, autant les gens qui sont spécialistes en leadership, qui sont coachs, et les présidents d'organisations ou les gestionnaires dans les organisations qui veulent en savoir plus sur comment bien gérer le talent. Donc, sans plus tarder, without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Bérard to share his knowledge, his expertise, his stories, and definitely help us understand how we can better use and manage talent. Alors voilà, à vous, Monsieur Bérard.
Merci beaucoup, France. Bienvenue tout le monde. Welcome to this session. It seems that you had a pretty packed week and a rich week, I should say. What we really want to do today is to, as the title would indicate, talk about how to use assessment in a development situation. Donc, l'utilisation de l'évaluation psychométrique à des fins de développement. I'm doing a lot of work, I've been doing a lot of work over the years in the healthcare sector, multiple sectors, but healthcare being one of them. And I remember one day working with physician leaders and executive leaders in hospitals, and we're talking about assessment, and some of them were a bit unclear why we're doing that, or gently pushing back. And that expression came to me at the time and said, well, would you prescribe either a drug or a plan or a surgery or anything without a very good diagnostic? And I really made my point that day. And donc, ce que je veux partager avec vous, c'est comment utiliser les outils d'évaluation, de diagnostic, dans les situations de développement. Je vais parler un petit peu plus de quelques autres pratiques de gestion de talent également, mais surtout dans les situations de développement, donc la prescription, ici étant la solution de développement. There's kind of 3 sections to my session. We have 90 minutes. We're planning to do those 3 sections in the first 60 and keep about 30 for Q&A. But right away, I want to encourage you to send your question in writing or prepare your question. France will be my co-pilot during the session and will monitor the question you send, and I will pause at those 3 sections, and we may answer some of those questions during the session, not just at the Q&A. Donc, préparez vos questions et à la fin, vous pourrez même poser des questions live de vive voix à la fin de la session. So, what are the 3 segments of this section? There's so many tests on the market. I am sure you've heard about plenty of them. You may have done some yourself, you may have used some, you may have heard some HR people, you may have heard your sister, brother talking about some tests they had to do. Happened in my family recently. Somebody sent me an email and say, hey, I'm going a leadership program. I'm going to do all those tests. So it happened. So I want to demystify, clarify, put some order around all these tests. First thing. Second thing, why would we use assessment, and what does it add to the leadership development solutions in terms of so the why using assessment, and a little bit on the how, of course. And my last segment will be, I want to show you some examples. I mean, we can't go through a dozen of them, but I have 3 situations I want to show you, 2 individual, 1 group situation where, and I was involved personally in those situations where we use a high resolution assessment, and you'll see the power of it as well. Okay, donc préparez vos questions et on veut aller de l'avant. Comme je disais tout à l'heure, l'objectif, c'est de simplifier, clarifier, démystifier un peu tous ces tests que l'on voit sur le marché. There's so many of them, so we really want to simplify, demystify, clarify those tests. And I'm going to put them in 3 categories. These are not legal categories. These are really ways to put them, put the tests that resemble to each other, and what they do and what they don't do. Although I say it's not illegal, it is not a legal categorization. Up to a few years ago, and really not far, up to 2 or 3 years ago, the American Psychological Association, AMA, APA, sorry, American Psychological Association, was categorizing the tests the way I will describe them, but they changed that. So I don't want to say this is exactly how they do it now, but it's such a good way to make it easier to grasp and easier to clarify. Okay, let's get started. 3 categories of tests. La première, c'est des tests de style d'apprendre. Pas de style d'apprendre. La première, c'est high-level description and what type of people are you. More of a personality type, des types de personnalité. Pardon, c'est ce que je voulais dire en français, type de personnalité. Vous voyez en bas à droite ici le MBTI, Myers-Briggs, le DISC, Insight, tout test que vous avez peut-être vu qui fonctionne avec des couleurs, you're a red and yellow type of thing. Those are made to really do high-level description. You see at the top left here, high-level description of a person. It's a good way to increase self-awareness, but there's not a lot of depth in those tests. They don't go deep. They're really made for a shallow assessment and to help somebody who's not familiar with these concepts. And if I use, for instance, we all know that the MBTI and was one of the first tests like that on the market, really put lots of awareness around the notion of being an extrovert or an introvert person. Those are concepts, so you're more of an introvert, more of an extrovert. It's at a high level. And so it's really high-level description, doesn't always go in as much into details. You'll see how I describe the others after. They typically have a limited number of concepts. MBTI, if you saw any of those results, you can be in 4x4, so 16 boxes. So you put people in categories, in big chunk. It's not a high resolution, it's really high level. That's what we mean by high level. Put people in a simplified, let me use the expression, bucket. Donc, on met les gens dans des catégories à un haut niveau pour simplifier, introverti, extroverti. What is really critical here, and please, I'm going to say it 2-3 times, these tests are not made to be used for selection, i.e. not to decide, should I hire France or not for that position? Is Alex the right guy for our next director IT role that is coming up next year? So you should never, ever use those tests for that. They've not been made for, they don't have what we call predictive validity. I'm an industrial psychologist, and that's my background, and we study a lot psychometric, and there's all sorts of concepts. I'll touch on a few of them, but those tests are higher level, more from a self-awareness perspective. And the analogy that you see on the screen here is, if you would have to think of a similar tool in the healthcare world, it would be a stethoscope. Nothing wrong with a stethoscope. It's a good tool, but it gives you a little bit of information, not super deep. You're not going to use a stethoscope to know if your leg is broken or if you have a cancer. So that's our first category. Think of them as more high level, not a lot of depth, absolutely not a predictive validity, good for self-awareness at a high level, shallower level, more of a shallow level, moins de profondeur, plus en grande catégorie, un peu comme un stéthoscope dans le domaine de la santé. Our second block of tests are getting a little bit more descriptive. Now we're really moving to having more categories, a little bit more refined. Instead of all the big blocks, it would be, most of you may know about the EQI. If you have used or know about the Berkman, I go by memory here, I think there's something like 40 different measurement aspect or traits. So now we're getting more into the word in psychometrics called construct validity. So it's really the validity at the concept level, like sociability would be a concept. So the tests have more statistics around them, more validity of what they measure, and they provide information enough to help you making a decision. So they're not, certainly not the tests alone to make a decision. And you can see at the bottom there, your EQI would be in that block, in that category, the OPQ, the Berkman, Holland is more a career test. So this is the X-ray. You went from the stethoscope to the X-ray, going deeper, good analysis. And many of those tests are based on the big five. And I'm just going to take 2 minutes here, and I can't give you a psychometric course here, but the big five, and I'm going to do something, I don't have a slide on it. I'm just going to go on the website. Alex, I'm going to ask you, do you see my screen still?
We see only cameras now.
Yeah, so if you want to share you have to unshare.
Oh, I have to share again. Okay.
Yes.
Then you have to share your
Okay.
view.
While you're doing this, Mr. Bérard, may I ask a question for participants, just to highlight maybe in the chat which tests they know or have done? It will give us a sense of who knows what a little bit.
That's interesting. Okay. And France, you see my screen now?
Yes, we do see your screen.
Okay. So I just went Google the big five personality the big five personality traits, and this is one of the site that came up. There's gazillion of them. Where I'm going here is most of the tests will be in my second and third category are based on those big five personality traits. And if you want to remember them, the acronym is OCEAN. And those five, and this is from science, this is from lots of fundamental research in psychology, and those are just the foundation. You won't see a test only with 5 traits, but those are the foundation. Most of the other tests have been developed from those and being a little bit more sophisticated and use all sorts of other descriptor, but that's the foundation, sort of almost the basic philosophy, if I use an analogy here. And what are those big 5? The O is for openness, and you can see the notion of openness here, touch on creativity, openness to try things, or a bit more resistant to change. Conscientiousness, most of people will know what conscientiousness is, but it's more about structure, so attention to detail, or prefer less structure, more fluid. Your E is for extroversion. Well, we all know that one. So extroversion versus introversion, enjoying being the center of attention, enjoying being with people, or less of a reserved person. Then the A is for agreeableness. Agreeableness will touch on empathy, relatedness with others. Are you highly interested or not on others? And the final one is neuroticism. Neuroticism, and again, those are the type of word we wouldn't use on a day-to-day test. Remember, this is just a foundation here. But it's all about emotional stability, emotional, more stress management, emotional stability, and so forth. So ocean for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Would
So,
it be possible to have just a link? Some people are asking for the link of the website in the chat.
oh yeah, we can
Okay.
send a link, but as I said, I'm not going to take credit for the link, the quality of what's in there. Guarantee Google the big 5 personality trait.
Okay.
It's called the big 5.
Yes.
Ocean, 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 yeah, and you will find it. I'm happy to share the link, but as I said, I didn't do a research to go on the perfect link. So do you still see the slides now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
I wrote down the reference to the big 5.
Okay. So we were at the second category. I was talking about the EQI, the OPQ, Berkman, and I don't want to say every single test, but lots of those tests, that's the foundation, and they build up on that with the different naming, nomenclature, différentes catégories, différents noms, mais c'est basé sur les 5 grands traits de personnalité. The third category has something a little bit, oh, sorry. So I remember I said this is like your x-ray here. The third category, now we really have something slightly different, and it's a smaller group of people in there. The next category has either certainly more depth, breadth, and more detailed assessment. But the biggest change is this here, is this predictive validity, i.e., on peut prédire le succès. On a un beaucoup plus haut niveau de probabilité de prédiction avec les scores d'un test comme celui-là. Donc, the predictive validity is more research, higher, and to be in that category, when, remember I said the American Psychological Association used to categorize like that, you would have to produce all your statistics and be qualifying for it. This is your MRI. There's a reason when you really have a serious pain in the neck and it's probably due to some disc issues. Well, the stethoscope doesn't help. The X-ray could show a few things, but what's different, and I'm not a physician and I'm a radiologist, but the MRI is really about high resolution. They can really see the detail and pinpoint between, yeah, C6 and C7, there's something around there, an issue with your disc. So it's really a different category here. You're really now talking about high resolution, and the idea of the predictive validity, I wrote there, we can make the decision for you, i.e. the test can make the decision for you. It's a bit provocative to say that because nobody will want the test to decide by itself. There's a human there. Mais en même temps, le point que je veux faire ici, c'est la solidité et la validité des données prédictives est de loin plus élevée. You see a couple of tests on the bottom right there that you certainly can recognize, the GMAT and the LSAT, the tests used for business school or for law school. And some law school, business school are not using only the GMAT. But what's behind these tests is lots of statistics to predict that the score of the GMAT will predict how the probability of being successful at an MBA. And then we're talking about less experienced people here, not necessarily the executive MBA. The LSAT will predict how successful you would be in a law school. The Wechsler, if you don't know, the Wechsler is an IQ test. When you say, what does that do there? The Wechsler is used in many school boards in different provinces to select or admit your children in gifted programs. Le Wechsler, c'est un test d'intelligence qui sera utilisé pour sélectionner ou admettre des étudiants dans des programmes d'enfants doués ou surdoués. So you can see the philosophy here is about more predictability and all very openly and and full disclosure, that's what I want to say, donc très ouvertement, the success finder that is there is the test that we use. And it's most likely the one that has more depth and breadth and predictability in terms of psychometric tests for personality. So I will talk about it a little bit later and show you example. The other way, and this is your MRI, as I said, you went from the stethoscope to the X-ray and the MRI, la résonance magnétique en français. The other way to think about it is, how long does it take to be certified? How long does it take to learn how to use that test? And I'm not a medical person. I don't even have the answer, but I'm sure that how to learn properly a stethoscope is not as complicated as how to learn properly X-rays and how to read the results. And I'm sure that how to learn an X-ray is not as complicated as how to use and interpret data in an MRI. So you can see there on the screen, a category 3, a Myers-Briggs type of thing. The training may be a few hours, half a day. So again, it will depend on who, depends on the test, but it's a short training. No necessarily supervisions. Donc, on ne va pas nécessairement devoir superviser les premières fois que vous allez faire des évaluations. Il n'y a pas d'examen, il n'y a pas de test. When you get to your second category, most of the time your training will be a day, 2 days, 3 days. It will vary again according to the tests. And when I say day, sometimes the training could be a portion online and a portion face-to-face, like self-learning and then face-to-face, but time of learning. You may have to do many of those tests, you may have to do supervision, meaning before I'm going to certify you, you may have to do 1 or 2 debrief in front of me, and I was going to give you coaching and feedback. Some of them will have a test, not necessarily that they have to pass. When you get to the third category, guaranteed, the training is much longer. And I'm not talking about training here on how to interpret a GMAT, for instance, but the research behind it, but also when you get to the test like the Success Finder, it will be about 40 to 50 hours. You'll have supervisions, you have exams, because the test is so much more rich. There's more to learn and more complexity to it, but the output and the results and the predictability is much higher. So I hope it helped to make some. Is the test a stethoscope, an X-ray, or an MRI?
Monsieur Bérard?
Oui.
Before we move, I know you probably have some specific time for questions. It's just there was a few questions regarding specific tools. Would you like to address them only at the end, or you would like, since we are talking about MBTI and the 3 different types or 3 different categories, would you like me to read you a few? How would you like to proceed?
Why don't we do that? But I'll do my best to answer them, but please, I'm going to say it right away. I don't have a deep knowledge of every test on the market, so I'll do my best to answer the questions, but don't take me as an expert in all of them.
And there's so many tools out there that we can use. We don't categorize them, or don't even want to categorize them in 1, 2, 3. There's a question about from Sylvie, who said, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the answer. Are these not only cognitive assessments? She was referring to the 3rd category.
No, absolutely not. It's a good question, though, because if I just go back to this one here, LSAT, GMAT, Wechsler look like very cognitive ability, like problem solving and predictive learning, capacity to learn and things like that. But the Success Finder, absolutely not. Like, you'll see lots of personality traits and competencies in there.
Yeah. And there's a question around what category of tests are work approach behavior tests? Not sure I understand the question.
Work approach behavior test.
Yes.
I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, but on the market, there's also, we're talking here about psychometric tests. You can also do assessment with simulation assessment, like, assessment centers are simulating a situation. I say, I want to assess you, France, and I give you the context, and you're going to coach that person, and we'll listen to you, and then we'll assess how good you are at coaching others. So that's called simulation-based. Or work sample, les centres d'évaluation, les échantillons de
And we
I'm not
actually
sure.
have that, just to put
Sure.
maybe a bit of information on that. There's a supervisory in basket. There was the same
Yeah,
question, another sub
exactly that.
question from that same person. That's the kind of testing that
Yeah.
can be done that falls into another category. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that would be because they're not psychometric. You know, and believe me, they're good. Like, I'm not saying they're not good. I've used them many times. But a simulation, an in-basket or an interactive simulation, is in this whole category of often called assessment centers or behavioral base, simulation base. And because what you try to do is to reproduce a sample of the a day in the life of a supervisor, manager, and I'm gonna put you in that situation, see how you react, and I'll assess that. But that behavior demonstrated, and I'm observing, and I'm assessing. That's different than a psychometric test.
Okay. And the last question for you before we move on to your second portion, and the person talks about 360. Is there a preferred 360 feedback assessment you would recommend?
I will answer that question in about 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay, thank
I'll
you.
keep you, whoever asked the question, I'll keep you on the qui-vive pour quelques minutes. Yeah, I will talk about 360. This is a good question, actually, because there's a lot of, there's lots of really good way to use 360. That page, and I don't know if it's the case for everybody, but we will share the document with you after. That page I wrote there, as you can see on the right, ask yourself those questions. If I want to use a test, and the first one is the question, what do you want to use? Why do you want to use the assessment? What do you want to do? What do you want to do with the data? C'est quoi l'objectif d'utiliser une évaluation? Et qu'est-ce que je veux faire avec les données? The reason I go there is the more critical the decision, the better the tests need to be. Remember, I said, do not use a Myers-Briggs, a DISC, or an insight to predict performance, i.e. to hire somebody or promote somebody. Because when you hire somebody, you're saying, I'm trying to predict if this person will be successful in that job. The test is not made for that, okay? So you would not use an X-ray. Imagine going to the hospital, you think your leg is broken, and all the physician is using is a stethoscope on your leg. You would say, what are you doing? Like, you're not going to identify if my bone is broken. So the more critical the decision, for instance, hiring, promoting, succession management, you really want to have a better test. The other thing that I encourage people to think is not only the usage of the data, but who's your audience? I mentioned before that I did a lot of work in healthcare. Who am I dealing with? Or who was I dealing with in those situations? We still do plenty of work with healthcare. We do a lot of work with engineers. The moment you go and work, and I'm sure some of you work with the same thing, like engineer, IT people, actuaire, people that are very data driven, people that are used in healthcare, they say evidence-based. You better have a good assessment tool, because if you come with your shallow color style, lots of people will say, what is this? You know, so, and they will discréditer ou avoir peu de crédibilité, peu d'adhésion envers les résultats d'un test. So it's what do you want to do with it, but who's your audience? Think about that as well when you select the test. So what do we want to do? Now we're going to talk a little bit more about why and what to do with the assessment results. Very often, assessing somebody is to increase self-awareness. Améliorer, développer la connaissance de soi. It is a critical part of leadership development. Coaching, because I'm sure you're talking a lot about coaching here. I do executive coaching mainly at the CEO level or executive level. And it's fascinating sometimes to realize that people are not totally or really self-aware. So you want to help them to have a better understanding of their strengths, development needs, and then I'll go in a little bit more detail you see there in terms of derailers. I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. You also want, depending on the situation, generate descriptive or predictive analytics. And when we talk about analytics, it's mainly when you get to in terms of the group. I will assess 15 of my EX1 in order to see who has potential to grow. I'm going to assess 5 or 6 or 25 of our accountants, financial specialists, in order to identify who can move to a leadership role. So when you do group analysis, typically you will want descriptive analytics, meaning the traits, describing the people, but you also fall into the predictive analytics the moment you say, out of those 20 leaders or 20 or 15 accountant financial specialists, which one I predict would have more potential to be a good leader, not just a tech person. Now you're starting to predict, and that's really the type of results that you may want out of your analysis, out of your testing. I'm just going to add a couple of words around self-awareness here for a minute, because I did quite a lot of work on that, and I published a book on called Accelerating Leadership Development, and I wrote on this. And it's fascinating, a quote-unquote simple principle, like self-awareness, connaissance de soi. Donc, on connaît tous ce principe-là, hein, la connaissance de soi. Mais quand on creuse un peu, on voit que y a toujours plus derrière quand on commence à creuser un concept. Donc, we see that when you start to dig a little bit, there's more to it. And I wrote there one question, two answers. What is it that one is aware when one is self-aware? And that's an interesting question. I remember when I read that question in I can't remember which article years ago, and I said, what a good question, because you kind of provoke a little bit your thinking. And I'm giving you just simplifying here 2 answers. You can be aware of your identity, meaning how you think about yourself. I see myself as, very social, very ambitious, a highly structured person, or a more reserved person. How do I see myself? But self-awareness could be about your reputation. How are you seen by others? How are you being evaluated by others? That's your reputation. How others think about you. So instead of me and what I think of myself, if I would go and ask 15 people that I work with on a regular basis, what would they say about me? And that's why I love the image there, where you can look at it both sides. There's the, kind of almost a mirror effect. So self-awareness is more than just, oh, I know about myself. Having assessment really helped to go deeper. Not only that, now I'm going to dig a little bit more, because you're probably doing coaching and help people to have better self-awareness. I just mentioned self-awareness according to your identity, how I see myself. Perception of others is my reputation. But our goal is to align the two, which is called self-accuracy. Donc, l'adéquation entre comment je me vois moi-même, mon identité, et comment je suis vu par les autres, ma réputation. And I'm sure you've heard situations, seen it, maybe even for yourself, where you see that what somebody think of her or him is quite different than how people are seeing her or him. And it's not on everything, but in some specific aspect. And often called blind spot. That's exactly what it is. It's, I thought of me this way, and then others are telling me, well, that's a bit different. And I love that quote at the bottom here. So it isn't what you know about. It isn't what you don't know that will hurt you. It's what you do know that isn't true. So if I think that I'm very pleasant, I'm a highly social person, I love joke and humor and interacting with others, but if others are seeing me as arrogant, not listening, always talk about myself and too talkative, ooh, that's different. So how do others see me? And if you think of using assessment in coaching, in leadership development, especially coaching, that's what you want. You want to go deep enough to have a good understanding of who is truly that person is and how he or she is perceived, so we can talk with your coachee and improve the self-awareness. So that was a little bit on the self-awareness track. How are we doing here, folks? Are we good? The sound is good and the pace is good?
La présentation aussi, je tiens à le mentionner, elle va être disponible en français pour ceux qui apprécieraient un peu plus de français. Donc, nous le comprenons. Puis, évidemment, tout va être disponible dans la plateforme allouée au partage du contenu. Et si on peut peut-être ajouter un petit peu plus de français dans les explications, M. Bérard, ce serait apprécié de notre clientèle.
OK, parfait. Merci du rappel.
Je vois aussi qu'il y a un lien vers votre livre que quelqu'un a mis en ligne. Donc, merci pour le partage.
Merci beaucoup.
Puis, à part ça, je pense qu'il y a... c'est tout. Il n'y a pas d'autres questions, mais n'hésitez pas à les inscrire. Please don't hesitate to write more questions or comments in the chat box.
OK. Merci du rappel. Oui, on mettra les documents en français. J'ai eu à faire des présentations où on mettait les slides, les diapos dans les deux langues, mais ça devient des fois même un peu mélangeant parce qu'on passe sur les mêmes slides trop souvent. Donc, je vais juste parler brièvement ici d'identifier. Souvent dans les évaluations, ce que l'on veut, c'est identifier les forces, les besoins de développement et la notion de dérailleur. Bon, les forces, évidemment, quelles sont les caractéristiques qui sont très naturelles. Donc, j'ai un score élevé, par exemple, dans une évaluation et que je vais tirer profit et utiliser dans mon travail. Des besoins de développement, je dis toujours aux gens, mais c'est pas parce que c'est un score faible dans un test que c'est un besoin de développement. Si c'est un score faible sur une certaine dimension et que c'est très important dans mon poste, là, ça devient un besoin de développement. L'innovation est un bel exemple, créativité, innovation. Si j'ai un score faible, mais je ne suis pas dans un poste qui demande beaucoup d'innovation. C'est pas quelque chose que je dois faire régulièrement. Donc, c'est pas parce que je suis moins créatif que j'ai besoin de le développer si mon travail ne me le demande pas. Donc, si mon travail me demande, par exemple, de constamment rencontrer des gens, puis de faire du coaching, puis d'interagir avec eux, de les motiver, mais que moi, interagir avec les autres, puis discuter ou résoudre des problèmes interactifs de façon interactive, c'est pas ma force, mais là, ça devient vraiment un besoin de développement. I want to talk a little bit about the notion of derailers, because sometimes it's kind of a newer concept and not always well known. The derailers are, the research behind them is, think about them as a bundle of a few characteristics that, when put together, can really cause a problem. Donc, certains traits de personnalité mis ensemble qui, dû à leur dynamique, causent certaines difficultés, ou the reason we say derailers, that you can make you derail and not perform. That's why I put the bike. I'm a cyclist, by the way. That's why I put that there. And you put the bike on the ground. For instance, there's all sorts of derailers. But imagine somebody who would have very high score on sociability, very gregarious, extroverted, high score on self-confidence, high score on ambition, and sense of humor, and technically competent. So let me just repeat them, and you would say, well, this is the perfect person. Sociability, interactivity, extrovert, self-confidence, ambition. We want that for our kids, right? Self-confidence, ambition, good sense of humor, technically competent, and has a good track record of success. That sounds, it's extremely positive. But the blend of those traits, characteristics together and experience, pushed too far, will cause what we call derailers. And then it will be perceived by others as somebody who's an attention seeker, meaning I want the attention on me instead of on you and the team. I may not listen enough. I may become argumentative. Argumentative is a typical derailer. And then leading to poor decisions, disengagement in the team. So it often starts with too much of good things, but blended together will cause a derailer. So this is where the idea of having tests that is not just a stethoscope, not just at the high level, but go a little bit deeper, and then you can see a sort of the dynamic, une dynamique de traits mis ensemble qui vont causer des problèmes. OK? Et voilà la réponse à la question du 360. J'espère que la personne qui a posé la question, je ne vous ai pas causé trop d'impatience. Donc, parlons un peu des évaluations 360. Très bonne très bon outil d'évaluation. Je vais démystifier, clarifier un peu les 360. Un 360, c'est une très bonne façon très bon outil à utiliser dans un contexte de développement. Contexte de développement 1 à 1, coaching, contexte de développement en groupe, la formation, contexte de développement, quelqu'un va débriefer l'évaluation pour améliorer ma connaissance de soi, mais c'est l'objectif, the purpose should be for development. Ideal to increase self-awareness. Remember what I said before, identity and reputation? What do I think of myself? Psychometric assessment, but how am I seen by others? That's really very helpful for that. Not to be used in conflictual situations, i.e., if a leader is having issues with her team and there's some really animosity, somebody left, somebody else made a complaint, and you say, oh, let's do a 360 to see what they think of their leader. Absolutely not. The reason is you're going to ask people's opinion about a leader when there's tension, conflict, and I'm not saying you shouldn't get their opinion, but the use of a survey or a 360 may totally lead to a mutiny, or people will put extremely severe scores or comments, or will completely sugarcoat et ne diront pas vraiment ce qu'ils pensent de la personne. Donc, à ne pas utiliser dans des situations où il y a des conflits. On peut faire des entrevues, on peut faire un focus group, on peut parler aux gens, mais pas nécessairement utiliser un 360. Un outil 360, ce n'est pas un outil psychométrique. Et c'est important de clarifier, il y a une différence entre les outils psychométriques, tous ceux qu'on a nommés avant, du Myers-Briggs jusqu'au Success Finder, en passant par l'OPQ ou le EQI. Un outil psychométrique, vous vous souvenez ce que j'ai parlé des Big Five, commence à la base avec certains concepts. Et il y a des items, des questions, des items qui ont été élaborés pour mesurer des concepts, le concept sociabilité, le concept structure, ainsi de suite. Et on a validé avec énormément d'analyses statistiques lesquels items sont des bons pour prédire, pour mesurer ce concept-là. Voilà, c'est donc le concept de sociabilité, par exemple. Ça, c'est un outil, un bon test psychométrique. C'est des questions qui ne sont pas toujours évidentes. Qu'est-ce que ça mesure? Ça ne dit pas « Êtes-vous sociable? » de 1 à 5. Ça ne serait pas un bon item dans un test. Donc, toutes sortes de questions, d'items qui mènent à une mesure sur des concepts. Un 360, c'est demander aux gens qui travaillent avec moi, c'est comment de travailler avec Jocelyn? How is it to work with that person? That's what it is. And I put there, it can be used with a survey. It can be used verbally. I often do that in coaching. I'm going to coach a person. I'm a vice president of technology. And he reports to DG, and he has peers, and he has direct report. So I asked to spend 20-minute, 30-minute max, 20-minute interview with his leader, 2 or 3 peers, 2 or 3 of his direct report. And I would say, how is it to work with Bob? Tell me. What do you like of him? What do you appreciate of him? What do you think he can do better? What are his strengths? I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and then I'll ask everybody else, and I'll write my notes, and I'll have a good idea. So it has nothing to do with a psychometric test. I just talk to other people. So when you do it via a survey, it's the same thing. It's just that you can do it in a more structured way, and the system will aggregate the results and will say, hey, you know, from a 1 to 7, here's your score. You seem to have a higher score from your employees than your peers, and all sorts of differences. So a 360 is either a survey or verbal. And when I say it's not a psychometric assessment, this is not negative. I'm just clarifying that this is a test. Sorry, this is a survey about the opinion of others, perception of others of working with a certain person at a certain time. Okay, and what's really interesting is to pair them up. Ce qui est super intéressant et puissant, c'est d'accompagner un 360 avec un outil psychométrique. Parce que l'outil psychométrique, c'est un peu comme si vous mesurez l'ADN d'une personne. Le 360, ben, c'est de quoi il a l'air. Il est grand, il est petit, il est comment. Donc, ici, c'est les traits de personnalité mesurés avec un outil psychométrique, selon les résultats du test. Mais ça se manifeste comment, ça, au travail? Ça a l'air de quoi quand c'est mon patron? Ça a l'air de quoi quand c'est mon collègue ou quand c'est mon employé? Donc, les deux ensemble, c'est très riche. It's very rich. It's very efficient to pair a psychometric with a 360. Then I can go on because you would like to match what is measured in the 360 and what is measured in the psychometric. So typically, the 360 are custom. So you have a list of competencies in the government for EX leaders. You can take your three. I think I know you have, France, I think you m'avez confirmé. On peut prendre ces compétences-là avec les comportements qui s'y rattachent et créer un 360 avec ces comportements-là. Donc, so there are a few 360 on the market that would refer to some leadership models specifically, but generally speaking, a 360 is aligned with your competency model in-house. J'espère que j'ai répondu à votre question, France.
Oui, merci pour ces précisions. Je pense que pour les gens utilisent beaucoup le 360. We're using a lot of 360 within the public service. Also, those tests like EQI, MBTI, Insights, the ones that we read in the chat box are really frequent. There's also a comment from someone who said, yes, she really liked your comment on when not to use a 360. That's I'll just repeat that comment. I think it's useful. J'adore, she said, j'adore tellement désastreux dans un contexte de mobbing ou de harcèlement psychologique. Donc, ça dit mutilation du 360. Donc, vraiment, je pense la présentation, ce que je trouve, juste peut-être remettre en petit contexte rapide, c'est intéressant de savoir quoi utiliser, comment l'utiliser, peu importe le rôle qu'on joue. It's important to know what to use and when to use, whether or not you're in charge of a psychometric team or not, or leadership team. We all, I think, gain to know those tools that can help us grow and be more self-aware and use them wisely, or even refer our employees to use some of the great tools that we have accessible out there. So, donc voilà mon petit commentaire et on continue.
Merci. Oui, je vais faire un autre commentaire sur les 360. La personne disait, c'est oui, quand ne pas utiliser. Là, après que j'ai fait un commentaire. Il y a un autre contexte à faire très attention. L'utilisation d'un 360 dans une... en fait, je vais passer à ma prochaine slide, puis je vais traiter les deux questions en même temps. Je vais traiter différentes questions ici. You might be wondering, peut-être que vous posez ces questions-là. Voici ma première question. Can I use a psychometric assessment in performance review? And can I use a 360 in performance review? My answer to that is no. You shouldn't. And let me clarify. Dans une évaluation de performance, revue de performance, évaluation de rendement, peu importe le terme que vous utilisez, on s'assoit ensemble pour reviser, pour revoir, discuter d'une période passée. 6 mois, 1 an, 4 mois, peu importe la période. Comment ça s'est passé? Est-ce qu'on a atteint les objectifs qu'on voulait? Comment ça fonctionnait avec l'équipe? Le leadership que vous avez démontré. Donc, on regarde en arrière. On fait une revue de performance, comme je disais, que ce soit annuel, semi-année, trimestrielle, peu importe. Donc, on regarde. Et c'est une occasion pour dire, bien, justement, comment ça s'est passé, qu'est-ce qui a bien fonctionné, on va continuer à le faire, puis il y a quelque chose qui n'a pas bien été, on va le faire un peu différemment. L'évaluation psychométrique ici, et surtout, et même un 360, c'est la perception des autres, 360, ou encore comment le genre de résultat sur un outil psychométrique, par exemple, je sais pas, le DISC ou un autre. Mais ce n'est pas ma performance. Et même un outil 360, ça doit être utilisé dans un but de développement. Parce que si on utilise un 360 dans un but d'évaluer votre rendement, bien là, on est en train de dire, bien, ce que les gens vont dire de toi, là, ça va aller dans ton dossier, puis ça va être ton évaluation de performance. Et même encore pire, si l'évaluation de performance est reliée à la rémunération ou l'augmentation de salaire, bien là, on vient de causer un sérieux problème, parce que là, ça veut dire que l'opinion des autres viendra impacter ma rémunération. Et tout ça, c'est interrelié. C'est bien sûr que quand je fais une évaluation de performance, moi, je suis président d'un groupe, donc j'ai beaucoup de gens qui relèvent de moi, bien, je vais voir un peu bien, comment ils fonctionnent avec leur équipe, puis comment ils travaillent avec leur pairs. Mais formellement, faire un 360 et une évaluation psychométrique doit être fait dans un but de développement ou encore dans un but de décision de carrière. Donc, de faire attention de ne pas not to hardwire a 360 with a performance review, especially when it touch on compensation. Okay, donc j'espère que ça clarifie un peu. Autre question, how often should we redo a test? I've done the test 3 years ago, 2 years ago, should I do it again? La réponse, ça dépend. It depends. Depends on the test. It depends on the two key principles in psychometric are reliability and validity. Les deux principes clés en psychométrie, c'est la fidélité et la validité. Donc, fidélité au sens psychométrique du terme. Validity, there's different validity, but I talked before about predictive validity. What's the correlation between the score in the test with the performance in the future? That's predictive validity. Reliability is the stability of the test. If I do the test today and I do it again in 6 months and I do it again another 6 months, how stable will be the score? So the better the test, whoops, let me check, I got something on my screen here. On est toujours bon, France? On m'entend toujours bien, oui?
Oui, on entend bien. C'était l'image qui avait disparu.
OK,
ça,
pardon.
Ça va.
Oui, j'ai eu un petit message de Zoom là, qui m'est apparu.
Ça va.
So, reliability or fidélité en français, c'est the stability of the test. And good tests, solid psychometric good tests, will be more stable over time. Hence, a rule of thumb. There's no laws. There's no absolutely scientific concepts, scientific rule on that. Rule of thumb, every 5 years, you probably should update the data. And I really insist on rule of thumb, because if you take a test that is not as stable, and I'm going to say it, this is not my opinion, this is research out there. Myers-Briggs is known to be fairly unstable. It's not far from being the best one on the market on that. So when you get a good test that has some reliability score high, it's high score on reliability, 3, 4, 5 years, especially when you get to 5 years, because typically there's age and stage, something may happen in your life, and you probably should redo the test. That's a rule of thumb. Can I use the test for selection or promotion? The answer is yes, but it depends which test. Remember what I said earlier, do not use the test for, and if you go online and you do a bit of research and not just don't go on the test the test website for themselves, but other reviews, and it's known. This is, please don't take that as Jocelyn think of. A Myers-Briggs, a DISC, or an Insight type of test should not be used for selection, and they will say it themselves. But how about the others? So you need to look at, because when you select or promote, remember what you do fundamentally, you predict performance. That's what you do. I want to predict if France would be a great director HR, and I've never met her before, or she works on another department, and so that's predicting. You need the test to be solid enough for that and made for that. How about succession management? Same thing, but because succession management, it's even longer prediction. I'm working with my IT whiz in my department, lots of IT, brilliant engineers, IT guys, and we realized that some of them were promoted in leadership, and boy, oh boy, that didn't work. Now, how can I identify on those IT technical people which one would be good for be a leader, first level, and second, maybe third level leadership? So you try to predict longer term. So again, necessity to have powerful tests that will be allowing you to make decisions like that. Predictability. Can people cheat when completing a test? They can try, they will try in many cases, especially if they're candidate for a position, because what's at stake there is, do I get the job or not? Versus if you are my coach and you're asking me to complete the test just to increase self-awareness. Having on that, and again, we can go on and on. I want to be careful here not to spend too much time. Good, solid tests will identify what is being called social desirability or inconsistency in terms of statistics, which will either correct the score or tell you this person was trying to portray themselves better than they are. And we see that in the good tests out there. I guarantee you're not going to have that in a Myers-Briggs or something like that, but you will have a score called social desirability. or whatever other word you may use, but it's to indicate how this person was not really answering in a very candid way. Sometimes I've seen sometimes people rushing to complete the test. Donc là, les résultats n'étaient pas valides. Donc, un score de désirabilité sociale parce que les gens ont essayé de se montrer mieux qu'ils sont vraiment en répondant aux questions. Et ma question ici, c'est pas une question, c'est préparer vos questions. France, est-ce qu'il y a une question que tu voudrais qu'on traite en ce moment avant que je passe à l'autre partie de ma présentation?
Merci pour la demande. Il n'y a pas d'autres questions spécifiques. Je pense que les questions vont attendre à la période du Q&A. Puis, le reste semble être des questions qui pourraient être un peu trop spécifiques. Donc, on va vous laisser terminer.
OK. Fait qu'il met juste, ouais, je vais essayer d'accélérer un petit peu. Je vois qu'il est presque 1 heure, presque 2 heures. Donc, how can we bring more science and rigor? Now I'm going to be talking about some example. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the higher resolution. What's the difference between using a category 1 versus a category 3? So, and again, full disclosure here. So this is the test that we use. At Film Talent is called Success Finder. And there's a reason why the image there looks like a DNA reading. The test goes really deep. So you can see here 120 data point. So the way it works is the base of the test is 85 behavioral traits. Remember this at 4 categories. In the Berkman has about 40, if I recall. 85 behavioral traits, 26 competencies, and 35 career themes. So that's a lot of information, and it goes deep and broad and high resolution, all like those new TV screen that you can buy, the TVs that has very high resolution. So the higher the resolution, the more accurate the reading, the better the description and the predictability. Remember this famous concept, and not invented by, but certainly very popularized by the Myers-Briggs over decades, notion of introvert versus extrovert. Donc, si je vous disais que c'est les mots qui vous viendraient quand on parle d'un introverti versus un extroverti. Un introverti va peut-être me dire, c'est quelqu'un qui est plus réservé, qui est plus tranquille, qui est peut-être, qui aime ça plus être seul ou en très petit groupe. Qui n'aime pas nécessairement être devant un grand groupe en train de présenter. Un extraverti, quelqu'un qui va parler un peu plus, quelqu'un qui va socialiser régulièrement, aller voir d'autres personnes qui adorent être en groupe, or that will meet a lot of people on a regular basis. But those are huge, big concepts. Let me take these two and show what it may look like when you go deeper with a high resolution. So here's a few. What are we talking about here? Do you mean somebody who likes to socialize a lot in their personal life? That's part of it. Do you mean visibility? Visibility is being in front of others or having lots of visibility out there. Are you talking about friendliness at work? Friendliness, you know. Are you talking about presence, le charisme? On parle de présence ou de charisme. Est-ce qu'on parle de besoin de reconnaissance, être reconnu publiquement? Est-ce qu'on parle de self-expression, which is really presenting? How am I in terms of presenting in front of others? Ou on parle de fraternité, ce qui veut dire l'appartenance à un groupe. You can see here, you went from one big bucket, you know, remember in the ocean, the big 5, the notion of an extrovert or versus the other. Now we have 7 of them. And by the way, those 7s are 7 traits measured in the Success Finder. So you can see the difference. So, and I will show you an example in 2 minutes where the accuracy of the reading makes the story much more specific. And the other thing I want to say, please, oh please, be careful with preconceived idea. The preconceived idea that a good person to do sales or business development must be an extrovert. The preconceived idea that an IT person must be an introvert, or more likely. So be very careful, because when you start digging, this is where, because you can't put, because the moment you put people in, you have the principle, the concept is so big but not refined. There's all sorts of measurement in there. So, you know, I often say to people, imagine it's a continuum from 1 to 100%. one on each side. Are you 100% introvert? Are you 100% extrovert? Or are you at 1% or smack in the middle? So, but it's hard to read when the concept is not refined. So when you go in more details, this is where you'll see all sorts of nuances depending on the role. So I want to...
Monsieur Bérard?
Oui.
Just before we continue, your sound is up and down, so I don't know if it
Whoops.
captures the same. So for me, sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. So it seems it's captured differently. And there's a background missing. So there's a visual behind you that has changed. I just wanted to point that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, but that's okay. It's that's what happened. I got the message that...
Oh, okay. Perfect. It's just I really like the colors before.
Let me fix. I didn't realize that. That's the message I got. Was disconnected from my... Here it is.
Ah, there it is. The beautiful image.
Notre solarium, c'est ici à la maison.
C'est beau. And
okay.
while you're doing that, I just have a question. How are people intending to use the tools, the different tools that we highlighted today? It would be nice to have kind of thoughts on what they're using or what they are intending to use or what they wish they could be using in the future. So moving on to maybe knowing a bit more about them as well. And I'll let you continue.
Perfect. Merci. Donc, juste donner deux exemples ici. Je vais illustrer comment l'évaluation est utilisée dans 3 exemples. Donc, how did we use some of those data? So what I want to show you, I'll start with the first example, somebody that I coach, an executive leader. So what do we have here? I'm not going to give everything. I'm just going to give you, imagine that. So this is a real person, so an executive leader. Self-expression, 90, visibility, 70. Those are percentile. So self-expression, 90, visibility, 75, humor, presence, 75, leadership, 75. This is a gregarious person. He loves to talk, connect with everybody. He's in a room and he will go and talk to people. He's connecting with people easily. Strong leadership, presence, project interpersonal confidence, charismatic leader. Worked in different countries, so all of that. Great. Then cooperation 30, empathy 15, patient 15. You can see some of the wording that I put there because of tendency to focus solely on getting the job done. You may come across as impatient, insensitive, and feeling to the feeling of others. And it came up, obviously, in the dialogue that I had with people in his team. And finally, I put this, and I'm really simplifying the whole story here, but the goal was to develop a greater awareness, tolerance, and compassion for the emotion of others. Because you can look at somebody and say, wow, this is a great leader. I can guarantee you he's a great leader. Lots of people enjoy working with him. But then you start scratching and people realize, say, geez, like this is like, yes, the gregarious person, but doesn't really care, doesn't really pay attention to how I'm feeling. He can really, bulldoze other people because he didn't pay attention to their emotion and is not the most cooperative person. So a little bit more on the directive side. So these scores allowed us to go deeper and share their results, obviously, partager ses résultats avec la personne. Donc, on voit que ici, c'était un but d'augmenter la connaissance de soi, mais aussi d'avoir une analyse plus précise. Qu'est-ce qui fait que cette personne-là, donc, était perçue de cette façon? J'ai un autre cas ici qui est super intéressant. Donc, it's really now those more complex but fascinating situation. So here it is. Top executive leader, government agency, PhD, scientific background. You can see right there. That's son hold. And this is real stuff. And recent, not old. The issue, it's a government agency, so there's a board. And complaints came from the board, des commentaires négatifs comme quoi qui était perçu comme étant trop directif, n'écoute pas suffisamment, too pushy, not listening enough. So, and I asked a bunch of questions to people that work with him and completed the success finder. So let me share something with you. So remember percentile, analysis 99, theoretical reasoning, complexity, dealing with complex issues, perfectionism, cognitive ability, 99th percentile. He is a brain. He's brilliant, super brilliant, quick, really good. there's a 100-page document to read before the meeting. He will have read everything and remember and understand complexities a lot. He's decisive and assertive, so il n'a pas peur d'affirmer ses opinions. Yes, he's low patient, he's impatient, but look at that. Empathie, 65, 20e percentile, tact. So he's not rude. He's not rude at all. He may get impatient. It will more be inside of him, but he will share his opinion. But that's really good, like empathy and tact high. So why would he be perceived as too pushy and not listening enough? So the whole, remember we said, oh, is he an introvert or an extrovert? Well, let's dig a little bit deeper here. Sociabilité, 5e percentile. Popularité, being visible and being, or friendliness, popularity is also called friendliness, 15 and 25th percentile. Constraint, meaning limiting the expression of my emotion, donc garder mes émotions à l'intérieur, 60. Relatable, 40. But although this person is highly, I'm going to use this simply for the more of a reserved, introverted person, look at presence, 95. This is charismatic. Now, put all of those together. This is a complex case here, but he's absolutely brilliant. He's highly assertive, and he's not rude. He doesn't like to be with a group of people. Absolutely not. Like if he can be done, as soon as I'm done, I'm out of here. And he knows he's in contact with others regularly, but he doesn't like it. But when he's in front of a group, he is super charismatic. So you can see here, if you would have said, he's an introvert or an extrovert? He's for sure an introvert. But see how the high resolution help us here. So to make a long story short, he really he understands the concept so much more than the people on the board. He's faster, quicker than them. He's impatient, doesn't like to be in a group. So I'm going to move quickly. I have opinion on this, and I'm going to be assertive on my opinion. And that's what really caused it. So when I debrief the results with him, il y a un insight, donc de comprendre vraiment chez lui quelles sont ces caractéristiques qui causaient ces problèmes. Et ça a vraiment permis, j'ai dû vraiment analyser plus en détail. Et lui, donc, a compris très bien qu'est-ce qui faisait que c'était perçu comme étant too directive, donc trop directif. Donc, vous voyez la différence ici entre this is an MRI, this is not a stethoscope. So, and that really allowed me to go deeper with him to understand as well. OK? Donc, dernier point que je veux faire, parce que c'est le temps de passer aux questions, réponses. Vous êtes sans doute impliqué des fois non seulement individuellement, du coaching 1 à 1, mais travailler avec des groupes, une équipe. Donc, une équipe intacte, par exemple, hein, une gestionnaire avec son équipe, 10 personnes, 12 personnes, peu importe. Et on fait souvent ce genre d'intervention qu'on appelle souvent sous le vocable de team effectiveness, l'efficacité d'équipe. Mais d'utiliser une évaluation, c'est très intéressant aussi. C'est pareil, on peut demander du feedback de chacun, hein, verbalement, mais d'avoir une évaluation qui va venir mettre non seulement chaque évaluation psychométrique, évidemment, est à propos d'une personne, donc chacun a ses résultats. Mais quand on met tout ça ensemble, le portrait de famille, de quoi ça a l'air? Donc, quels sont? Ici, ça vient de l'évaluation, encore une fois, de Success Finder. Et c'est juste une partie des résultats. Il y a beaucoup plus, il y a 26 compétences. Ici, on en retrouve 6. Donc, et on a simplifié en disant, ben, vert, c'est élevé, hein, jaune, c'est moyen, puis orange, rouge, donc c'est faible. Et là, on parle de pourcentage de l'équipe, et non pas le score, là, mais des pourcentages d'équipe. Donc, cette équipe-là, il y a une compétence qui s'appelle Thrive in Chaos, c'est normalement être efficace, d'être pas trop rigide, d'avoir de la flexibilité. Donc, plusieurs sont élevés, d'autres moyens. Très orienté profit, finance, très orienté finance, un bon mix. Strive for Excellence, c'est le perfectionnisme, attention aux détails, encore une fois, un très bon mix ici, très, très imputable, hein, des gens qui n'ont pas peur d'être responsables, imputables de la situation. Mais là, on arrive à establish his order. Soudainement, il n'y a plus personne qui est dans le vert. Quelques-uns sont un score moyen, mais un peu plus de la moitié de l'équipe sont faibles. Ça, ce qui est ressorti, puis c'était une des problématiques, on parle de beaucoup d'actions,
on a des bonnes idées, on discute, mais ça manque de plan, on ne planifie pas assez, ça manque de structure. La même discussion revient au meeting le mois suivant en disant oui, on en a parlé, on en parle encore, mais la planification n'a pas été mise en place. Donc, il y a vraiment, ici, on voyait qu'il y avait un impact sur les résultats de l'équipe. Et quand c'est ressorti, tout le monde, parce que là, on partage les résultats avec tout le monde, en disant c'est vrai que ça manque de structure, on discute, on n'a pas nécessairement toujours le but précis qu'on souhaite atteindre. Et même quand on est arrivé en gestion de en embracing change ou accepter le changement, on se rend compte que ils sont plutôt prudents, si on prend un autre terme, plus conservateurs, plus prudents, juste une toute petite partie du groupe donc, qui était très ouvert au changement. Donc, ça permet à un groupe, au lieu d'être self-awareness à propos de moi, now it's awareness of others, la connaissance des autres, us as a team, nous comme équipe, de quoi ça a l'air. Donc, c'est les mêmes principes, améliorer la connaissance de soi pour prendre des décisions de développement, comment on peut s'améliorer et tirer profit de nos forces. Synthèse, on a fait des types d'outils d'évaluation, type of assessment. On va du stéthoscope au X-ray au MRI, donc la catégorie 1, le plus grand concept, utilisé juste pour la connaissance de soi, jusqu'à des principes, des outils d'évaluation beaucoup plus en profondeur, ce que j'ai appelé de high resolution, haute résolution. Et on a parlé de l'outil 360, comment l'utiliser. On a donc par la suite parlé de comment utiliser, quand utiliser, donc dans un but de développement du leadership, sélection, de gestion de relève, d'efficacité d'équipe. Ne pas utiliser un outil de type catégorie 1 dans un but de sélection, ne pas utiliser un 360 dans des situations de conflit ou pour l'évaluation comme telle de la performance. Et on a vu l'application les avantages d'un outil qui va plus en profondeur. Donc, what are the benefits? Et voilà, France, on est rendu à
Merci
notre
beaucoup.
période de questions. On a encore 20 minutes.
Absolument. Ben, on a des beaux commentaires aussi en lien avec, oui, les budgets associés à ça. On a aussi, j'aimerais peut-être qu'on aborde la question de la dominance historique of psychology. C'est un commentaire de Mme Lavergne ou Monsieur Lavergne. What about the predominant history of psychology, foundational research done by white males, tested in universities on predominantly white male undergraduates in the United States? How does this affect inclusive assessment? How can this be dealt with? Et je pense que c'est une question très importante et actuelle.
Une question très importante, actuelle. Est-ce que la question est en français ou en anglais?
En anglais.
Okay, so this is a great question, and boy, oh boy, could we spend time on that one, because you're really referring, and I can see just by the question, you know what you're talking about. Lots of tests years ago were developed with yes, white male professional people in the state, and that's wrong. That's wrong. Like wrong meaning from a diversity and inclusive perspective. You want your test to be bias free or as free as possible, because now we can really go deep. Where was the test developed? Do you have in the database then where the test was developed? Canadian, American, European, so diversity. Diversity from an ethnic standpoint, diversity from a level, a hierarchy level. But again, be careful. If the test is made for leadership role, well, that's okay to have leaders only, but you need to, and this is all data that should be available completely objectively with any good tests. If you get a cheap and cheerful test and give you a broad answer, well, stay away from that. And this is why, and I'm not here to be a critique here, I'm really here to put clarity, but not everything in the market is very good. Not everything in the market is equal. That's what I was trying to say here today. Do your homework, ask people that are knowledgeable, but I can say when we talk about Success Finder, it's been developed mainly in Canada, not with US, yes, but mainly in Canada. It was developed with highly diverse background people, so you got to be very careful about those. Yeah.
Merci beaucoup. Puis il y a aussi, donc, oui, la question des budgets. Je peux ajouter, une fois que votre réponse sera faite, les différentes façons dont on se procure ou on peut accéder à ces outils-là en tant que fonctionnaire de la fonction publique et ayant été impliqué aussi dans les programmes du leadership. Donc, je vous laisse aborder la question de budget, qui n'est pas une question facile.
Non, et puis c'est un peu difficile pour moi. Je peux parler en plus en termes génériques des budgets, mais les budgets et les autorisations, je dirais que ça dépend de votre propre organisation. Mais d'abord, dans le domaine du testing, il y a toujours, pour la très, 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 très grande majorité des tests, deux façons de faire. Vous demandez à un expert d'évaluer, d'utiliser le test puis de vous donner des résultats. Par exemple, vous dites, Jocelyn, est-ce qu'on peut évaluer 2 personnes? Oui, je prends le test, j'utilise les résultats, puis je vous partage les résultats. Ou vous faites certifier et après ça, vous achetez le test vous-même puis vous interprétez des résultats. Hein? C'est dans le domaine de la formation, on dirait que train the trainer. Hein? Moi, je donne le cours ou je vous forme France, puis c'est vous qui faites le cours. Donc, évidemment, si vous faites certifier sur un test, ben, ça va vous coûter beaucoup moins cher pour l'utiliser après parce que ça va être votre temps versus mon temps. Parce que le prix du test, c'est jamais, c'est pas le test qui coûte très cher. Hein? Les tests, ça va jouer de 50 à 500 $, disons. Hein? Je vais mettre un range, là, le cheap and cheerful, jusqu'à un test qui est beaucoup plus rigoureux, 50 à 500 $ le prix du test. Mais ce qui coûte plus cher, c'est le temps. Donc, le temps de l'administration, hein, aller sur la plateforme, envoyer, et après ça, l'expert qui doit donc en faire l'interprétation. C'est sûr que si vous êtes certifié, puis vous faites vous-même l'interprétation, bien là, le budget va être moins élevé. Vous aurez à payer votre certification, mais c'est le prix est beaucoup moindre parce que c'est vous qui faites le travail au lieu de payer un expert.
Merci. Je peux ajouter peut-être aussi
Oui.
que c'est une formule aussi qui est très utilisée au sein de l'école de la fonction publique. Within the Canada School Public Service, in our leadership programs, we certify debriefers. So we train the trainer, we purchase the tool, and we administer them to our public servant or to the communities who join our leadership programs. Some departments do the same thing as well. So it's really a matter of understanding what is the purpose of the tool. I think the great questions that you've asked, Mr. Bérard, it's, what is it going to serve for? What time and when do you want to use it? Who's going to administer it? And what combination of tools as well would you like to have? One important fact that I liked about Success Finder, and I know Insights, and I'm not in favor of just one tool. I love all of them. I would do all of them. But the fact that also that the Success Finder, you can do the test, but extract different kinds of reports, the team report, the individual report, and all kinds of utilities for the tool. So that's also something that could also help people.
Absolutely.
Yes, do you want to add something, Mr. Bérard?
Ben, juste rapidement, ça fait partie des tests qui vont être plus avancés sur le marché, vont non seulement avoir plus de profondeur, plus de rigueur, plus de validité prédictive, mais l'investissement dans l'outil, dans la plateforme, hein, on parle vraiment d'outils informatisés aujourd'hui, bien sûr, c'est le type d'output, le type de rapport. Je vais avoir un rapport très, très simple parce que j'ai 250 personnes à évaluer. Je ne veux pas un rapport de 20 pages pour chaque, puis je dois prendre une décision, ou je dois évaluer des EX, des DG, and I really want a 20-page report with all the data because there's so much, and anything in between. Donc, les plateformes plus avancées vont avoir plus de flexibilité selon le besoin. Hein? On dit, je vais utiliser une expression, quand on fait de la sélection de haut volume, hein, on dit high volume, low touch. J'ai 200 personnes à évaluer parce que j'ai besoin très, très rapidement de faire une sélection. Ben, I'm not going to have an hour and a half with each of them. I don't want a 20-page report. I want a very, very short result of assessment, high volume, low touch, or low volume, high touch. I'm going to assess a few executive leaders dans un but de coaching, dans un but de développement. Les enjeux sont importants. C'est des gens très, très éduqués qui vont avoir un œil critique sur l'outil. Ben, I want a more robust report. So you see, and anything in between. Donc, entre ces deux extrêmes aussi. Donc, les plateformes plus avancées ont plus de flexibilité sur le type d'output.
Merci. Nous avons aussi un commentaire de Madame Brunet qui dit when you have a coach, it is a good idea to share your results with them. Yes, it's a good foundational piece when you want your coach to coach you well. So you have all kinds of those psychometric tools or assessment that can be used and shared with them. There's a question for you, Monsieur Bérard. What's your perspective on the value of normative versus ipsative? I'm not sure I'm saying this right.
Normative or ipsative?
Ipsative, thank you. Test. That's
Okay.
my French here.
Okay. Let me just I'm just writing a word to remember. I will answer the question. I just want to come back to what you just said before, France. Je pense que c'était un commentaire. Est-ce que c'est une bonne chose de partager les résultats de l'évaluation avec le coach? Est-ce que c'était bien ça?
Oui. Ben, c'est un commentaire plutôt, mais si vous avez des suggestions, oui.
Oui, ben c'est ça. C'est exactement ce que j'ai.
Une opinion.
J'ai une opinion. C'est pas non seulement un avantage, je dirais que c'est un must. Come back to the title of this session today, the diagnostic before the prescription. Donc, le diagnostic avant la prescription. Ben, le diagnostic, c'est le résultat du test. La prescription, vous comprenez que j'utilise une analogie ici, elle vient du coach. C'est-à-dire que je fais l'analogie du milieu médical. Ce n'est pas le patient qui fait la prescription, c'est le médecin. Ben, le coachee qui a ses résultats d'évaluation, il doit les avoir, évidemment, c'est lui ou elle qui a fait le test. Mais please, donner les résultats, le coach doit les avoir aussi, parce que France, c'est mon coach. Et moi, j'ai mes résultats d'évaluation, puis je vois toutes sortes de scores. Là. Mais France, elle ne le sait pas. Ben, tu ne peux pas utiliser les résultats pour mieux m'aider. You have to have the assessment result. It's a big question, who has access to the results? You always have to be very careful about that one. But very often, what I said is with permission, of course, with permission from the coachee, the coachee's leader, donc la personne que je coach, son patron à elle, sa gestionnaire, elle peut aussi, elle, avoir les résultats parce que I'm the coach, I don't work with you every day, but you, leader, work with you every day. Donc, il y a moyen d'utiliser aussi les résultats avec le patron, le gestionnaire du coaché, avec permission, ainsi de suite, évidemment. Donc, ça, c'est important. C'est très important que les deux aient les résultats.
Et est-ce que je peux parce que Geneviève a aussi mentionné, Mme Brunet a mentionné aussi l'importance d'être certifié pour utiliser l'outil aussi. Donc, de partager un résultat qui n'est par exemple pas un rapport, mais seulement des données brutes peut être un problème, j'imagine. Donc, pouvez-vous élaborer là-dessus?
C'est non seulement un problème, mais si quelqu'un est psychologue, certifié psychologue, c'est interdit par notre corporation de partager des données brutes. C'est interdit. Donc, si vous utilisez un test, puis il n'y a pas besoin d'être psychologue, la plupart des tests, on n'a pas besoin d'être psychologue aujourd'hui. Mais ce que je suis en train de dire, c'est que les données brutes, ça ne devra pas être partagé avec celui qui a fait le test. C'est l'interprétation des données. Le rapport va être écrit de sorte que ça interprète les données. Le consultant, que ce soit vous qui avez été certifié ou un consultant externe, va faire l'interprétation des données. Ça me permet aussi, on va de commentaire en commentaire, j'ai toujours pas répondu à la question sur les notions ipsatives, mais les 360, parce qu'un 360, c'est pas psychométrique, donc c'est plus facile à comprendre. Hein? Il n'y a pas de certification sur le contenu. On peut être certifié sur comment faire un débrief d'un 360, mais j'ai souvent vu beaucoup de tort causé par le fait qu'un rapport 360 est envoyé au gestionnaire sans débrief, sans discussion. On peut heurter quelqu'un, on peut causer du tort beaucoup plus que d'aider parce qu'il va y avoir des commentaires qui vont blesser, qui a écrit ça, comment ça se fait qu'ils m'ont mis. Donc, l'interprétation ne peut pas toujours être bien faite et le consultant va aider à prendre un peu de recul et à regarder l'ensemble des données. Donc, je dirais de ne pas donner un rapport 360 sans débrief, sans analyse avec quelqu'un qui est qualifié pour le faire.
Merci. Pour ajouter à ça, à l'École de la fonction publique aussi, dans les 360, il y avait tout un protocole de partage des données, à quel moment on le partage et quelle distance il y a entre le débriefage et le moment où la personne reçoit son rapport pour s'assurer que la personne ne reste pas prise avec des données puis ça vient la déstabiliser. Donc, le débriefage est essentiel. Est-ce que vous voulez ajouter?
Je vais juste répondre à la question, des différents types de questions, normatifs, ipsatifs et tout ça. Ipsatif, là, ipsative, ça veut dire quand vous complétez un test, c'est des choix forcés. Il y a un item A, un item B, et je dois choisir celui qui me représente le plus. Donc, forced choice. Et l'avantage des modèles ipsatifs, c'est que ça force la distribution des scores. C'est-à-dire que si l'item A mesure mon niveau de sociabilité et l'item B mesure mon niveau de structure, et dans les deux, j'ai choisi A. Donc, j'ai eu 1 point pour A, mais j'ai eu -1 ou 0 pour B. Donc, ça va répartir les scores et ça fait des résultats qui vont avoir plus de différence. On peut vraiment voir, on parle statistiquement de discrimination statistique. On parle de distribution de scores. Tandis que pensez à des résultats où vous voyez une échelle de 1 à 5, de 1 à 8, peu importe, hein, de pas beaucoup à énormément. Bien, souvent, on voit plein de scores qui sont tous autour de 1 à 8, tous autour de 10, 7. C'est bunch top, tout est regroupé, donc c'est moins distribué. Donc, l'avantage des tests ipsatifs, c'est la distribution des scores, donc une meilleure précision ou différenciation. Différenciation.
Merci. Ça commence à couper. Je ne sais pas si c'est seulement de mon côté, mais il y a une dernière question, puis il nous reste un petit 4 minutes avant que je fasse même la conclusion.
Oui.
Des exemples de derailers, de cas de derailers, en avez-vous quelques-uns?
Bien, j'ai mentionné tout ce qui était attention seeking. Attention seeking, c'est un des derailers qui est identifié où les gens vont aimer avoir beaucoup d'attention sur eux, aiment parler de leur réalisation, souvent vient beaucoup de sociabilité et beaucoup d'ambition. Donc, c'est comme si je vais montrer à tout le monde les résultats que j'ai. Et quand on est gestionnaire d'équipe, ça finit par mettre l'équipe dans l'ombre. Donc, il y a ça. Les exemples de derailers, on va aussi voir un autre type où on a des gens qui sont très analytiques, hein, qui aiment beaucoup le détail, très, très bonne attention aux détails, attention aux détails, très, très focusés sur la qualité, hein, des très, très hauts niveaux de standard de qualité et un faible niveau de risque, hein, donc risk averse. Donc, attention to detail, analytical, risk averse. The consequence of that is that you may delay significant decision making. You can't make up your mind, or you will delay decision process. So that's another example. Il y a un bruit, effectivement, que j'entends.
Ça coupe un peu, oui, mais ça
Désolé,
revient.
là.
C'est pas grave, on arrive à la fin. De toute façon, ça n'a pas été comme ça du tout durant la séance.
Bon,
C'était
tant
super.
mieux. Tant mieux.
Je veux vraiment vous remercier pour le temps pris à expliquer ces différents types de tests. Je pense que ça a fait un énorme survol, un excellent survol de l'ensemble des différents tests qu'on peut utiliser aussi pour identifier le talent, mais aussi bien accompagner les gens dans leur croissance professionnelle. So thank you very much, Monsieur Bérard, for your time explaining the different tools and really helping people understand the different tools they can use for their own professional growth. For those who want to access those tests, definitely using we have learning plans, you have a personal budget you can use, and I think it's really important to use those resources to early on in our career, identify our strength, not wait too long, and definitely find what what you're doing best and find the best place for you. Donc, vraiment utiliser vos budgets personnels de formation et même favoriser aussi l'échange de ces informations-là avec vos professionnels à l'intérieur de vos ministères. And again, Monsieur Bérard, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your expertise and knowledge. It was so appreciated. People are saying, great session, excellente séance. Donc, merci pour votre temps.
Ça fait plaisir. Merci beaucoup,
Et
France.
on a vos
Merci à tout le monde.
coordonnées. Merci.
Bonne journée.
Bonne journée tout le monde.
Au revoir.